welcome to my channel. Today we have the best stories from Reddit. Today's story is called, I Live in My Father's Remote House. For the last 3 nights, someone has been knocking on my window. Don't forget to rate the video, it's very important. Let's get started. Okay, I don't even know where to start. I'm in a motel room that smells like stale cigarettes and bleach, about 100 miles from where I was last night. For context, I have a job that literally melts your brain. You know the kind. Endless spreadsheets, video calls where everyone talks over each other, a flood of emails marked urgent. After a particularly brutal 6-month project, I was completely burned out. Walking zombie. My boss, to his credit, noticed and practically ordered me to take 2 weeks off. Go somewhere with no cell service, he said. The first place that came to mind was my father's old cabin. Actually, it wasn't just his. Before him, it belonged to my grandfather, and before that, my great-grandfather. It's been in my family for a century, maybe longer. A small, sturdy log cabin deep in the woods, a few miles from the nearest town. The literal definition of off the grid. A well for water, a generator for a few hours of electricity a day, and a fireplace for heat. It was the perfect place to disconnect, sit in silence, and let my brain rest. My father died a few years ago. We weren't close. He was a quiet, reserved man, and the cabin was his sanctuary. I have a few vague, happy memories of being there as a child. The smell of pine and campfire smoke, the feel of rough-hewn wood under my bare feet, him teaching me to skip stones on the nearby creek. Going back felt like a way to honor his memory, I guess. A chance to find the peace he found there. The drive was long, the last hour on a winding dirt road more obstacle course than road. When I finally arrived, the cabin looked exactly as I remembered it. The logs were dark gray, weathered. The porch had settled a bit, but it was still sturdy. The air was clean and cold, and the silence was so complete, it pressed against my ears. No cars, no sirens, no people. Just the wind rustling through the massive pines that surrounded the house like ancient sentinels. The first day, I just existed. I unpacked my meager supplies, books, non-perishable food, a couple of bottles of good whiskey. I swept the dust off the floor, built a fire in the fireplace, and sat on the porch watching the sun set, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. For the first time in months, the knot in my chest began to loosen. That first night, I ran the generator for a few hours to get some light and read. The cabin's living room had 2 large windows facing the impenetrable blackness of the forest. As soon as I turned on the lamp by my chair, the moths came. Of course they did. The only source of light in an ocean of darkness. It was going to attract every insect for miles. They fluttered and danced against the glass, their dusty wings like soft gray snow on the pane. I barely noticed. It was a familiar, comforting sound of the wild. A soft, rustling tapping of moths against the glass. I read for an hour, turned off the generator, and fell into the deepest, most dreamless sleep I'd had in years. The second day was even better. I chopped firewood, went for a long hike, and felt the city stress fall away with every step. I was reconnecting with something primal, something real. The world was simple again. That night, I did the same thing. Fired up the generator, poured myself some whiskey, and settled in with my book. And the moths came again. At first, it was the same as the night before, the chaotic drumming of wings against the glass. But as the minutes passed, I started to notice something strange. A sound that stood out from the chaos. A single, insistent tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was different from the soft, erratic impacts of the other moths. It was sharper, more deliberate. I looked up from my book, trying to locate the source. On the right window, there was a large, pale moth, bigger than the others, almost the size of my thumb. It wasn't trying to fly. It was perfectly still, except for its wings. It would lift one wing and strike it against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. Insects are weird. I went back to my book, but I couldn't focus. Now that I'd noticed the sound, it was impossible to ignore. It had a pattern to it. Tap, 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 tap. A pause. Then again. Tap, 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 tap. I closed the book and just watched. The large moth stayed put, methodically striking its wing against the glass. It was odd. I'd never seen one do anything like that. It felt less like an insect attracted to light and more like something intelligent, trying to get my attention. I know it sounds crazy. I thought it was crazy. I chalked it up to spending too much time alone and quiet, my mind playing tricks on me. I turned off the generator, and the tapping stopped the second the light went out. The silence that rushed in felt heavier than before. The next day, the thought of the tapping moth followed me everywhere. It was a splinter in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd witnessed something profoundly unnatural. The cabin's quiet solitude now felt watchful. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. That evening, I hesitated for a long time before starting the generator. But sitting in total darkness was worse. So I pulled the cord, the engine sputtered to life, and the light came on. I didn't even pretend to read. I just sat in my chair with a glass of whiskey, waiting. Within minutes, the insects arrived. And so did he. The same large, pale moth landed in almost the same spot on the window. It paused for a moment, and then came the tapping. Tap, 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 tap. Long pause. Tap, 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 tap. This time, I was ready. I grabbed a pen and an old leather-bound journal I'd found in the desk drawer. My grandfather's, judging by the faded initials on the cover. I didn't know what I was doing. Instinct took over. I decided to record the tapping. I came up with a simple system. A dot for a short, quick sound. A dash for a slightly longer, more drawn-out one. I noted the pauses between sequences. For the next 3 hours, I sat there like a mad scientist, eyes fixed on the moth, scratching the pen across the yellowed paper. The world narrowed down to that single window pane and the rhythmic sound echoing in the small, warm room. Dot, dot, dot. Page after page filled with my frantic scribbles of dots and dashes. The moth was tireless. It never stopped, except for the deliberate pauses between patterns. My hand was cramping, my eyes burning from the strain, but I couldn't stop. I was obsessed. There was a logic, a structure to it, too consistent to be random. Then a memory surfaced. Something I'd read years ago online. A pop science article about animal intelligence. It mentioned experiments where researchers had taught bumblebees to associate symbols with rewards, a basic form of communication. It even briefly touched on the possibility of teaching them simple binary signals, like a rudimentary form of Morse code. The pen dropped from my hand, clattering onto the wooden floor. Morse code. It was the craziest, most absurd thought I'd ever had. Moths don't communicate in Morse code. It's impossible. It would defy every law of nature. But the patterns on the page, they looked familiar. I remembered learning them as a kid in Boy Scouts. 3 dots for S, 3 dashes for O. Dot, dot, dot. Dash, dash, dash. Dot, dot, dot. I looked at the window. The moth was tapping out an S-O-S. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone. It wasn't connected to a network, but the battery was full. Before I'd left, I'd downloaded a bunch of stuff just in case. Books, movies, and a survival guide app. I fumbled it open, my fingers slick with sweat. The app had a utilities section, a flashlight, a compass, and a Morse code table. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I set the journal on my lap, opened to the first page, and started translating. My hands were shaking so badly it was hard to write. The first few fragments were nonsense, gibberish. I must have misheard, miswritten. I felt a wave of relief. Nothing. Just my imagination running wild. I was about to laugh it off, pour myself another whiskey, and go to bed. Then I came to a sequence I was sure I'd gotten right. It was long, and the rhythm was incredibly clear. Dot. I translated letter by letter. U-N-D-E-R. Under. I couldn't breathe. Okay, a coincidence. It had to be. I kept reading, scanning the pages of dots and dashes, comparing them to the table on my phone. The next intelligible word I translated was dot hungry. Hungry. The air in the cabin suddenly felt thin and cold. I stood up and paced the small room, the old floorboards creaking under my feet. Under. Hungry. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. But from whom? And how? The moth was just an insect. It couldn't think, couldn't communicate. I spent the rest of the night translating. The generator coughed and died around 2 a.m, plunging the room into darkness and silence. The tapping stopped immediately. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the translated words burning in my head. Soon. Deep. Weight. Stone. Roots. They were disjointed, single words, fragments of thought, like listening to someone talk in their sleep. But they painted a terrible, impressionistic picture. Something was down there. But where? Under the cabin. Something deep. Something stone, tangled in roots. And it was hungry, waiting. I could only hope I was overreacting, my mind just filling in the blanks of a puzzle that didn't exist. The next day I was wrecked. I didn't hike. I didn't chop wood. I barely ate. I searched the cabin, trying to find, I don't know what, a clue, an explanation. I rummaged through my father's old desk drawers, through the bookshelves lined with dusty paperbacks. But what I was looking for was at the back of my grandfather's journal, the same one I'd been writing the moth's message in. At the very end, where my grandfather's neat cursive gave way to my great-grandfather's spidery scrawl. The entries were short, cryptic. October 12th, 1934. The generator is a blessing, but its light draws them. Need to be careful. May 3rd, 1938. Dug a new well. Found a stone at 20 feet. Smooth, black, not slate. Filled it back in. Will draw water from the creek. September 21st, 1945. It sleeps, but it listens. The old man knew. Silence is its cradle. Noise is its dream. Do not wake it. July 16th, 1952. Tell the boy not to turn off the light. Never dig past the old oak. Some things are better left buried. Some hungers never fade. My blood turned to ice. Some hungers never fade. My ancestors, did they know? That night, I knew I should listen to reason. I was terrified, a primal instinct in my body screaming at me to get in the car and leave. But another part of me, a morbid, obsessive curiosity, wanted to know the rest of the story. I had to know what was under my house. I started the generator. The moths came. The tapping began. This time, the messages were different. Longer, more coherent. Like listening, I had somehow strengthened the connection. The moth tapped, and I wrote, my hand flying across the page. I didn't stop to translate. I filled page after page of the journal, the dots and dashes blurring together. It tapped faster, more urgently. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, with a strange, static energy. The light from the lamp seemed to dim, like it was being swallowed by the air itself. Finally, after hours, the moth stopped. It fell from the window pane, a tiny, lifeless speck on the porch. The other moths fluttered in confusion for a moment, before disappearing into the night. Silence. I sat motionless for a long time, a terrible fear squeezing my chest. Then, with shaking hands, I picked up my phone and began to translate the final, long message. The story it told was not of this world. It spoke of a time before the trees, before the soil. It spoke of a great, silent intelligence that had descended from the stars and burrowed deep into the cooling earth, hiding from the burning light of the sun. It was not a creature of flesh and blood, but a creature of patience, of gravity, of hunger. It spoke of the first people, my ancestors, who found it. They did not understand it, but they feared it. They could feel its presence in the deep rock, the cold that seeped up from the ground. They could not kill it, so they bound it. They performed rituals, laid great stones, and buried it under layers of earth and prayer, lulling it into a silent, dreamless sleep. The message explained that it could not see, could not hear. Its only sense was a kind of perception tied to energy. For millennia, the only sensations it had were the slow heat of the sun deep in the earth, the growth of roots, the shifting of stone. It slept. But the arrival of people brought new sensations. Fire, the vibration of voices, and then electricity, artificial light. To its ancient, slumbering consciousness, that light was a piercing scream in the eternal quiet, a sharp, painful needle prodding it awake. It could not move. Not yet. The bonds of ritual were strong, but it could reach up. It could touch the tiny, simple nervous systems of the creatures drawn to the light. Insects. It could borrow their bodies, use their frantic energy to tap against the barrier of my window, tapping out its history, its plea, its warning in the only language it could form from the binary chaos of their fluttering. I felt sick. My family had built a watchtower, a warden's shack, and for generations they'd kept watch, living quiet, humble lives so as not to disturb the only prisoner in this jail. My father, with his quiet solitude, had been a warden, and I, with my city stress and desperate need for light and noise, had been rattling the cell door all week. I skimmed the last few lines of the message. A new, frantic tapping had started just before the moth died. It was short, precise. I translated the final sequence of dots and dashes, scratching the pencil across the page. D, 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 D. My heart stopped. I read it again to be sure. It wakes when the light goes out. As my mind processed the final, terrible word, a sound came from the porch. A quiet, electric hum. I looked up from the journal. The bare bulb over the porch door, the very light that had drawn the moths, was flickering. It buzzed like a dying insect, flashed with a bright, agonizing intensity, and then went dark. The lamp beside me flickered in sympathy, then died. The generator outside coughed, sputtered, and went silent, plunging me into absolute, total darkness. The rhythmic tapping was gone. The world was utterly silent. Not the peaceful silence of the forest I'd craved, but a dead, waiting, hollow silence. The silence of something listening. I didn't breathe. I couldn't move. Then I heard it. It wasn't a sound from outside. Not the wind, not a falling branch, not an animal. It came from directly beneath my feet, from under the floorboards, from deep in the earth the cabin was built on. A slow, heavy scraping, the sound of something impossibly ancient and massive. The grind of stone on stone, a vibration I could feel through the soles of my boots and deep in my bones. It was the sound of a tomb door, locked for 1,000 years, swinging open. I didn't scream. The scream was trapped in my throat, a choked, pathetic wheeze. That was it. The spell of morbid curiosity shattered, blown away by a pure animal terror. I didn't think. I reacted. I scrambled backward, knocking over the chair, flailing in the dark. I backed away from the sound, my mind focused on one thing: out. I found the door, fumbled with the latch, my fingers clumsy. The scraping grew louder, turning into a deep, resonant groan that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. The door flew open, and I tumbled onto the porch, gasping the cold night air. I didn't look back. I ran across the clearing to my car, the keys already in my hand. The sound had become a constant, grinding vibration in the earth. I threw myself into the driver's seat, jammed the key in the ignition, and started to pray. The engine roared to life on the first try. I had never been so happy to hear its roar in my life. I slammed it into reverse, ignoring the trees, and spun the wheel, gravel spraying. The headlights cut through the darkness, briefly illuminating the cabin. There was nothing there, just the dark windows and the silent porch. But the ground in front of the steps looked wrong. It was bulging, like something underneath was trying to push its way up. I didn't wait to see what it was. I hit the gas and tore down the winding dirt road. The car bucked and slid, branches scraping the windows. I didn't slow down until the dirt turned to asphalt, and I didn't stop until the sun started to rise, and I saw the blessed, ugly, beautiful light of a motel sign. And now I'm here, writing this. I left everything there. My clothes, my father's memories, my grandfather's journal with its terrible accounts. I can never go back, I know that. The cabin, my family's legacy, is gone. It's a tomb, and I let whatever was buried there out. All I know is that something that should have slept forever has woken up. How did you like today's episode? Don't forget to rate the video. Thanks, and see you soon.